Just a little bit about what today's event is all about. This is part of an initiative called Women Leadership and Philanthropy, which was launched in the spring of 2013 by a group of dedicated McGill alumni in Montreal. And our aim is to increase the representation of women in positions of leadership, governance, and philanthropy at McGill. Since we started, we've hosted a couple of events. We've had 2 speed mentoring events, one here in Toronto and one in Montreal. We are having a Discourse series in Montreal with Madeleine Paquin. She's CEO of Logistec Corporation. And we've had brainstorming events with women in New York, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. And in addition to that, we started a LinkedIn group for McGill women. We currently have 450 members, and it's a supportive learning space where we hope members will post useful links, share lessons learned, and provide career advice. We hope to generate an honest and supportive dialogue through all these activities so that women who participate in our work can maximize their skills, potential, and elevate their careers. And on the topic of McGill alumni, in leadership positions, our very own Principal Suzanne Fortier recently delivered an address to the university outlining her vision for the future of McGill. And in it, she said she wanted to build on our commitment to students and expand our engagement with society. Professor Fortier told us that she envisions McGill as a university that is connected to its local and global communities, connected across disciplines, boundaries of geography and sectors. And she said McGill needs to ensure that it is a university with a clear sense of purpose. And she explained that because she said, what we do, learning, using, and advancing knowledge and exploring new paths in knowledge has never mattered more to our community and to our world. For those of you who are interested, her complete address is on McGill's website. These themes of engagement, connection, learning, and advancing knowledge are, of course, part of what we are doing here today with this special series. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator and our guest speaker. Our moderator is Alex Johnston, a dear friend of mine, who is Executive Director of Catalyst Canada. Alex worked previously at law firm Goodman's and was the Executive Director of Policy in the Office of the Premier of Ontario, where she played a key role in advancing a progressive women's agenda, including initiatives to support women's economic independence and health, and she is a longtime advocate for women's rights. Alex is a McGill grad, earning her Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Civil Law, and LLB from McGill, and we were very pleased that she's agreed to be moderator. And as you know, our special guest today is Kathleen Taylor, Chair of the Board of the Royal Bank of Canada, and the first woman to be chair of the board of a major Canadian bank. This makes her one of the most influential women in the country, probably in North America. Let's just stretch it a bit. So we are very grateful that she's taken the time out of her very busy schedule to share insights with us from her career. Katie serves as chair of RBC's Corporate Governance and Public Policy Committee, and she's also director of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. She's the former president and CEO of the Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts. She holds an MBA from the Schulich School of Business at York University, a law degree from Osgoode Hall, and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Toronto. Well, we'll forgive her for not having a McGill degree mixed in amongst all of that. But we're pleased to say that her daughter is currently a student at McGill and soon to be a graduate of McGill. Katie also was a founding member and is currently the chair of the Principal's International Advisory Board at McGill. So please join me in welcoming Alex and Katie.
So first of all, at the outset, we want to acknowledge we're wearing the same suit. And I want you to know that Katie copied me, which is becoming a bit of a habit. It's a bit
terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Her hair is getting suspiciously similar length.
Longer.
Yeah, longer, exactly.
We only met a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. But at the outset, I'm just going to say we're going to have a great conversation, initially focused on sort of Katie's professional career experiences, choices she made, and then we're going to move into the more personal. What I will say about Katie is Katie was my woman crush of 2013, and it's a tough list to crack, man. But what I love about Katie is just over a year ago, she cold called me through a mutual acquaintance, and she was reaching out to see if she could be helpful in the work that I do in supporting and advancing women. And we had a lovely, what turned into a very, very, very long coffee in Yorkville, and really connected. What I love about what Katie's doing today is this is very typical in terms of who she is, sharing her experience and using a platform of influence to really elevate issues that are important to the women in this room. So we're very, very grateful that you're making the time to do this today. Objective is really for you to learn from Katie. My secondary objective, as she well knows, is to make her cry. She is a bit of a crier. I've got a list of questions, and for the most part, I'll stick to those questions, but I'm going to try to dig. Once we turn questions over to the audience, if she has not yet cried, if there's anything you feel you could ask that will bring us to that place, God bless you. Bring it on. So with that, I'm laughing because the first question is about the Ontario Securities Commission proposed new regulations around comply and explain for targets about women on boards and executive committees. I know what Katie's going to answer because right before I came here today, I got Listed magazine at the office, and Katie's on the front cover. So I quickly read her response to these proposed amendments. But can you just tell us a little bit, Katie, about what you think the impact of these regulations will be? And just for those of you who don't know, the Ontario Securities Commission has proposed regulations that would require all TSX-listed companies to disclose targets for women on executive committees, targets for women on boards, and the strategies they're going to be using to help meet those targets. So that we anticipate will be coming forward as regulation the next year.
So, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Thanks to the McGill Alumni Association for including me. The jibe about U of T was really deep. Didn't make me cry, though. But just to share that at the outset, I should have been a McGill grad. The reason that I'm not, of course, has to do with a boy. I had a boyfriend in the small town I grew up in, and I was, at that point, not willing to move that far away from him. So I came to U of T. We broke up 8 months later. I tried to transfer back to McGill, but in those days, U of T wouldn't give you credit for courses done at McGill. I was going to do a study away year. It all became complicated. So in an effort to redeem myself, I got my daughter down there as quickly as I could. She fell in love, and there she now is. I get to visit your beautiful campus many times a year, actually, in my work with Suzanne Fortier, previously with Heather. But I have a real connection and a love for the university that I know is so near and dear to all of your hearts. As to the Ontario Securities Commission and its proposal, I am on the record, both personally and as chair of the Royal Bank of Canada, as being in favor of this proposal. There are a lot of other opinions that have been voiced. At one extreme are the do-nothing candidates. On the other extreme are those who have weighed in and said, no, the only way to do this is quotas. I said to the OSC in a roundtable, I've said it in previous interviews, and I said it again to Listed magazine, that I am hopeful that this is a really great first step for Canada. I believe that governance is something that Canadians embrace maybe differently than companies in other jurisdictions. You just have to look at what happened after Sarbanes-Oxley in Canada, compare that to what happened in some other companies, in some other countries, and what you see is broad adherence to stock exchange guidelines, with as few exceptions as companies can possibly muster. And so I think, and Alex, you're better situated to speak to this than I am statistically, but I can tell you anecdotally, the mere talk that this proposal was coming started to change the dialogue around board search. I hear it from the search firms that I'm engaged with professionally on the different boards that I work on. How many of their mandates are now for qualified female candidates? A big discussion. So I think that we're on the right track. I have also said that it can't just be about boards. We've got to be figuring out how to elevate the number of women who aspire to a C-suite or executive suite job. We've really got to change the dialogue on that. Otherwise, the pipeline, if it doesn't get bigger, the same candidates are coming out the other side. And so figuring out how to take young graduates, like are coming out of McGill, young women who are, the world is their oyster, and make sure that they have the structures and supports to get to those executive jobs where they can get the executive training that then allows them to go on to board service later in their careers. These are all part of a continuum of the same issue, and you can't solve one without solving the other, and in fact, I think that they are very intertwined. At the same time, and I've said this too, it can't just be about women. You know, this country that we live in is getting more diverse by the day, and the issues of non-gender diversity are continuing to increase. It's all about legitimate leadership and being representative of the communities that we work in and that we sell our business products to, and so all of these things are connected, and I think very importantly so.
I love the fact, though, that you're clear in public about your position on this, because I think it matters generally. I think it matters specifically because of the role that you're in. The comparator jurisdiction for us is Australia, and what we saw is 4 years ago when they started talking about this, the numbers started to move. The numbers have taken off. Right now, if we didn't do anything differently from what we've done in the past 20 years, it would take 15 years and 20 years respectively for women to make up 1 in 4 executive committee members and 1 in 4 board members. That's shocking to people when you put it in that context. Last week I sat down with the Globe Ed Board with Bill Down, the BMO CEO. We talked about this, and they said, aren't we just going to have the same conversation in 2 or 3 years? And both of us said categorically no. There's no scenario in which we are having the same conversation. The world has changed. We're changing with it. And I love the fact that you have been very clear about your support of this, because I think, you know, as a woman of real influence, that matters.
Well, I think that's all true, and I think one of the things I would do is throw this back to the audience, because this, you know, success on this is going to be a team sport. If you look at the dialogue that occurred around this when I was a recent graduate school graduate, it was non-existent.
Right.
And somebody said to me a few days ago, do you really think that your daughter's generation cares about these issues? And I said to them, I don't know the answer to that, but I sure hope so, because it has to be that each generation takes this and makes it stronger and better, just doesn't assume that the one before took care of it or the one afterwards will. And so I think it's a, you know, it's a personal commitment that I ask women to make in this effort.
It's great. That question was clearly not designed to make you cry, but we're getting there.
Yes. Passionate about this.
Yeah, we're moving in that direction. What significance do you think your appointment as RBC chair has for women?
Well, I've been told that it's huge, and so as a result, I generally believe that, and it's been huger than I ever expect. It's probably not a word, but I ever expected it to be.
Yeah.
You know, I've been on the board for a long time. I've done a lot of service there. I'm you know, one of the longest-serving directors at RBC. My training has been extensive. But I think the timing of the RBC choice and the OSC's proposition had a little bit to do with the amount of press. But I get asked over and over again, do firsts still matter for women? Is this not an old story? And my answer is that they have to still matter, because we have so much work to do. And so if there's anything about my life or my story that influences even one person to do something different, then that's really an important thing to have happen. And whether that's through example or through mentorship or through inspiration, it doesn't matter. But it is, these are important milestones for women. And it's not just about me, it's about all of the women who you hear about and are doing exceptional things in the world.
I think it's huge, and I remember when it happened, we had come to know each other a bit, and there was a ton of media activity that day and a lot of interest, and I was interviewed, and I'd done a couple interviews, and I was, you know, fairly circumspect, obviously positive, but, and finally I was on with Janet McFarland from the Globe, who writes on this a lot, and, you know, it was the first time I said, first of all, I dropped an F-bomb. I said, you can't quote this, but I said, this is a F-bomb game changer. And I said, it really is. And she said, you think so? She said, I think so too. And I said, let's talk about what this really means. I said, we're all going to say, you know, this is a positive step and blah, blah, blah. You know, it's not about the individual. But it really did. There was a significance to it because of the role and the position. It's the Royal Bank. It's an enormous, you know, organization for the Canadian economy, and it's just not how we see bank chairs. And I think visually, that shifted something pretty substantial, and I think the impact over the years to come will be meaningful.
Well, let's hope so.
Let's hope so. What have been some of the most rewarding aspects of your career?
Oh, there's so many, so I'll try to make it brief. I spent, as you probably all know, about just under 25 years of my professional life at Four Seasons in various executive roles, but for the last 15 years, either co-leading or leading the company globally. That was probably the most extraordinary business experience a person can have. I lived and worked all over the world, did business in over 60 countries. We don't have hotels in all of those countries yet, but I tried. And as a result, got to be exposed to so much cultural diversity, so much geographic diversity, and so many different ways of living and thinking about the world. And it was very formative for me, that executive journey. I learned a lot of things, part of them business, of course, but part of them personal. That was a tough executive life to lead. I was on airplanes probably about half of the time, which meant that raising children had to become another one of those team sports with lots of different people involved in making sure that our kids grew up healthy and happy. But it was, that was probably a highlight. And as with most experiences in business, it was about the people along the way. We had almost 40,000 employees at Four Seasons. I made it a point to get to know as many of them as I possibly could. We had over 100 hotel owners. I still have close personal relationships with all of them. We were a public company for a while, so my connection to Bay Street, Wall Street is, dates back from then. So it's all that working that you get to do. And of course, the connection with the Royal Bank has been a continuum of that for me. Wonderful organization, great people, all over the world doing fine work. And so I would say all those relationships has been my highlight.
So I'm going to add a couple of things that I've heard you speak about publicly. One, you talked about an incredible example about having to go over and negotiate something in the Middle East, and Four Seasons feeling like, can we send a woman? Is this
sure? And do you want me to tell that story?
Well, incredibly successful example. I'll just tell it for her. That was one. Secondly, your ability in a position of influence to really mentor people in a very powerful way.
Yes.
And then the third one, which was what made Katie cry publicly when we had a public conversation last September, was the Royal Bank. And part of the beauty of the Royal Bank is it really was your peers who put you forward as a person to lead the bank forward and lead them forward, which I think is an extraordinary testament to you.
For sure. The Egypt story, it happened to be Egypt. We were doing our first ever management contract in Egypt. This is the early 90s, so this is a long time ago, ladies, when the world for women in that region was considered to be a lot less open than it is here. And who's going to go over and negotiate? And someone said, well, she can't go. Well, what do you mean she can't go? Well, he can't send a woman to talk to him. And our CEO at the time, Izzy Sharp, said, well, that's all fine, but we don't have anybody else. So it was literally simply default that got me that assignment. We don't have anybody else. And it is, and necessity is often the mother of invention in the world as we know it. And I didn't have any qualms about it, so I went over, and somebody was waiting on the curb for me as I arrived at the hotel, and I did this negotiation. We then subsequently met again in London and met again in Cairo, and it went on for quite a long time. He did yell a lot and believed that whoever yelled the loudest would win the point. That's not my style. I'm very patient and in my negotiating approach, and ultimately we got a deal done that was good for both of us. And to this day, if I'm ever in Cairo, he always says, we have to get together for tea. And we always do. So it's one of those stories of different places. Prince Al-Walid, who was our shareholder, still is a shareholder of Four Seasons, but a very close advisor and supporter of mine over the years. He is a Saudi. but one of the great supporters of women in that country and women's rights in that country. Had the first female pilot in the history of the country and has done a whole bunch of other things. In fact, he instituted quotas in his local businesses for hiring only women so that they could figure out how to catch up over many years. So I've had a lot of those positive experiences internationally, which always gave me great belief that this sort of thing would take care of itself. Women would have a natural path. But clearly, we need help as we go along. And you mentioned mentoring. I had a lot of mentors and sponsors in my life. And what I've done since I've been in leadership positions is say yes to every person who's asked me to mentor them.
Will you mentor me?
I will.
Awesome.
I will. I don't know if it'll work,
You're going to
but
get like
I'll
50
try.
people. Yeah, hands up. Yeah.
And it's not an involved process.
make her
Sometimes
cry.
I just talk to people on the phone. Sometimes we meet for my favorite mentoring spot is the Starbucks under the Royal Bank Tower. It's quick and easy, and it's time for a latte. But I meet a lot of young people at the little counter there, and we talk about what they're thinking about next in life. And sometimes you feel like you've given great advice, and sometimes maybe you don't know whether you did or not. It doesn't matter. It's all about trying to help people get the kind of advice that maybe you needed when you were in that spot in your career. And I don't think you can ever get too much of it.
No, and you do it very naturally. The one interesting thing that I'll throw into the mix is we're finding in the research that men and women are being effectively mentored, what women are not being given in the same way as their male counterparts or sponsorship opportunities. So senior mentors who are well positioned to create opportunities, there's a lot of discussion now about the difference between the two. I think you're an incredible champion of people and of women. I think you're a very natural mentor and you do it in interactions regularly. But I think that those are things that, as women, we're really impressing upon them to understand and cultivate the kind of sponsorship relationship that will be advantageous to moving your career forward.
Yeah.
Are there strategies that you feel are effective for organizations or for women to move women into senior roles?
Well, I think there's a few things. You mentioned mentorship, which is important. Everybody needs mentors. And mentors are, I've talked about this before, and you can read all about it, very different than sponsors. Mentors are the people who are going to tell you the bad news, and you're going to listen to it, and you're going to make adjustments to how you behave or what you do next. Sponsors are different. Sponsors are people who have absolute, unfailing faith in your ability to succeed and are prepared to put their personal capital on the line for you. And so you need both. Sometimes they come in the same person, but lots of times they don't. And so if you're in an organization that has a strong mentoring program and a strong sponsoring program, that's great, but you've got to always test that theory, right? Is that mentor giving you the straight goods? And I'm mentoring a young woman at the moment who herself has lots of mentors and sponsors in a company, and she keeps getting mixed messages. And I said to her, well, actually, maybe you're not. Next time you go in, I want you to write everything good somebody says about you on the left-hand side of the page and everything bad they say about you on the right-hand side of the page. And then I want you to go home and only spend time on the right-hand side of the page, because that's where the constructive advice on improving your career is going to be. And sometimes we like to hear the good things and maybe don't spend quite as much time on the constructive side. And it's natural for mentors to be more nervous about moving to constructive because these relationships are delicate. I think on the sponsorship side, it's really making sure that the sponsor that you have been given, if that's how it works in your workplace, or the one that you have chosen, has that unfailing faith in your ability to rise to the top and has the power to make it happen. Those two things are incredibly important. And so you'll often find that sponsors will change through the journey of life as you move from company to company or department to department. But I continue to remind people that the responsibility for this is yours. You are the one who has to choose the right mentor. You are the one who has to make sure that the sponsor is the right sponsor. You're the CEO of your career. And there isn't anybody else who, at the end of the day, is going to be the person responsible if it doesn't work out or if it does. It really is your journey. And so taking control of it is incredibly important.
And on that, are there traits that you see in leaders that you feel are critical for high-level success?
Oh, leadership traits for high-level success are many and varied, and they are often also situational, and that's something that is important for high-functioning leaders to keep in mind. So first off, and any of you have heard me before, you hear this over and over and over again, I tell women all the time, hurry up and find your best self. Now, some people call that your authentic self, your real self, your whatever self. My contention is that if you're in a place where you're incredibly comfortable with your surroundings, incredibly confident, and if you're reading these articles and books that are just coming out in the last couple of days, Katie Kay and the others about confidence, Margaret Wente wrote about it, you're in a confident space, you're in a comfortable space, and you're in a space where you're really enjoying what you're doing, you will get to best self. But you've got to have a lot of things that you align in order for that to be true. We are our most productive when we are our best selves. And it doesn't matter if you're a tennis player, a CEO, or an actor or an actress. You do your best work when you are in your best place. And it isn't easy for women. I mean, we are making this joke about the suit, right? There are never have two men worried about what they should wear to an event. But we should have called each other and said, don't wear a gray suit. If I was going to do it, we should have. That's how it should have worked. So thinking of all...
I'm burning this when I get home.
Okay.
I will never do this to you again,
I'm keeping mine. But the point is that finding your best self as a woman in how you dress and how you comport, in how you speak, in how you engage, in how you have a range of emotion that you bring to your business, to your colleagues, to your work. This is really an experimental thing for women and something that we need to spend, in my opinion. I've spent more time on it than my husband, and I think women always have to spend more time on these issues just because we're not the same. We're not always going to show up in a gray suit. We're not always going to comport in the same way as men. But that is the value that we bring to the diversity debate. And so trying to suppress the very thing that is our most valuable element is a mistake. So figuring out what yours is and getting to a comfortable place, hugely important to your impact. I would say other things on the leadership agenda, I mean, it goes without saying integrity, but integrity and values are everything in leadership. You know, being able to look at yourself in the mirror every day and be proud of how you did something. And it's not always easy, because sometimes you have to do hard things, difficult things, unpopular things, in order to stay true to your values. But that compass, wherever yours comes from, has to be your guiding force every day. And then I said, you know, the greatest joy in my career was relationships. I'd go back to that on leadership. Having strong relationships and across many horizons in many ways is something that we know statistically women aren't doing as well as men. And there's a reason for that. We've got other things on our priority list that are higher than going to dinner at a women's networking event or going out with a group of business friends to discuss issues. We've got aging parents, we've got young children, we've got demanding husbands, we've got, oh my God, I just need to go to yoga. We've got a lot of things that are on our priority list very high. But investing in relation to men and women, business and friends over life will always pay extraordinary dividends. There are no bridges that can afford to be burned in a life that will end up being as short as the ones that we have in our careers.
There are 40 things I love about what you shared. When we look at leadership and perceptions of leadership around the world, we found that when you ask men and women what they look for in men, the top 3 characteristics they'll often identify are decisive, action-oriented, and problem solvers. Top 3 characteristics you look for in leaders: decisive, action-oriented, problem solvers, not the characteristics they associate with women. Both men and women leaders are sort of falling into that. I think what I've taken from you and hearing you speak about this is, you know, being yourself and being comfortable with your natural characteristics matters. women are decisive, problem solvers, action-oriented, but there are other things we bring to the table that might be part of the packaging that increasingly I think the message we're getting as middle-aged women like myself is be yourself and be comfortable being yourself, and you don't have to be a construct that is not you. What advice would you give to young women starting their careers?
Oh, aim high. I don't know how many in the room have read Sheryl Sandberg's book about Lean In. You don't have to agree with everything that Ms. Sandberg says about the journey of women, but you do have to agree with the concept of increasing the level of ambition. I would love to be able to ask a group of young graduates, raise your hand here if you would like to someday be a corporate director, but more importantly, raise your hand here if someday you want to be a CEO, because that is the more important question. That is the feeder market of leadership. And I don't mean it has to be the CEO of the company, but it has to be a leadership role where you, as a powerful, educated, happy, authentic, influential woman, can go out and make a difference in the world. And so making sure that we as young women aspire to that. And where we get that inspiration from probably doesn't matter a whole lot. I didn't have any female role models growing up in Oshawa. We had teachers and nurses. It was a relatively small community. Most moms did not work. We were an Irish Catholic community, so we had, at 5 kids in our family, we were a small family compared to my girlfriends and other schoolmates. So we found our inspiration, at least in my close girlfriend group, much later in life. I met the first female executive when I was on a summer job in graduate school that I ever knew in my life, and she happens to be the woman that introduced us. We've stayed in touch over these many, many years. So finding that inspiration, finding that person that you can look to that creates the art of the possible, but do it early. And make a plan and figure out how that's going to suit your personality and your desires and your passions and your temperament. That's really important.
That's great. I want the audience to be able to ask you a few questions, so I'll close out on this. You're very conscious of your platform of influence. I think you use it incredibly effectively. You're very giving with your time. You're devoted to sick kids, running the hospital foundation. You've taken on an influential sort of advisory role at McGill. How do you integrate the different pieces of your life, which clearly matter to you, being a parent, being a professional, being a community person, presumably nurturing your friendships? And if you don't mind, for this audience, I love McGill deeply and did 2 degrees there and had a parent who worked there for an extended period of his career. Why did you choose to devote some of your time to that institution, given that it's not somewhere that you had any connection to beforehand?
Sure. I think, I would say that as you get ready in your career to do work in the philanthropic arena and the give back arena, and I would encourage everyone to try to do that, even in some small way at some point in your career. It is the most rewarding work you will ever do. The easy pick are the ones that you have a reason to love. Sick kids. My brother, we lost him when he was 17. He was treated there for many, many, many years. And ultimately, the affinity started way back then. Now, I didn't reconnect with sick kids till about 10 years ago when I joined the board there. But it was time for me to give to sick kids. I did 10 years before that as a volunteer at the United Way, where I was very involved in the community campaign, leading it at 4 Seasons, and I was an individual giving cabinet member as well. McGill is more recent. I joined the McGill Principals International Strategic Advisory Board a couple of years ago when Heather Monroe Bloom, the immediately previous principal, was starting to think about the strategic future of the university in a slightly different way. She wanted to bring together a group of people with international focus. And I had known Heather. She had been on the 4 Seasons board when we were public. And at that point, she had just joined the RBC board. So we had reconnected after many years of being apart. And so back to relationships. That was a relationship. She was a friend. She asked me if I would consider this. And of course, I had Kevi going off to McGill, I hoped, because she hadn't yet received her acceptance. But in the belief that she would, I took the deep dive in. And it has been one of the most fascinating experiences I have ever had. Intellectually, from a relationships perspective, I've met people from all over the world that I didn't know. Heather brought together an extraordinary group of international business and educational minds. And we got to do some really fun work that you now see some of the fruits of in Suzanne Fortier's strategic vision. A lot of the work that the faculty and the administration did that we were working with them on relating to technology and libraries and online courses and student technology in the classroom, and I can go on and on. A lot of that came through PIAB for international advice. And so it is a fantastic feeling when you learn a lot, which we did. I think all of us on that group learned a lot, and then actually see some of it going to happen. Right. You know, Sick Kids Research Tower, probably pointing in the wrong. I was on that cabinet, but it got built, and it's amazing. There, and it's now a world-class example of what the art of the possible is when a community rallies around a cause. And you know, the tangible results of these personal investments are real, just like they are a business. And as I said, in some ways, as or if not more rewarding for people. So make sure you find time to do it. And you meet a lot of fun people.
That's amazing. Why don't we, I don't know time-wise where we're at, but why don't we open it up to the floor for a few questions?
Alex, thank you so much. I was with a colleague last night that sits on a philanthropic board with me, and she has just been appointed to the Sun Life board. She comes from a long history, legal and financial business, a former CEO of one of the smaller financial institutions in Canada. And she was talking about corporate board appointments. And she said, as a woman, and Alex, I hope you can solve this, or Kathleen in the future, she said the frustration, she gets all kinds of headhunters calling her about recommendations for other women to sit on corporate boards. But one of the prerequisites not only is very strong financial background, they're all looking for previous board experience. And she said it's so frustrating as a woman. She said, you know, these women are brilliant. They've got all kinds of skills, but there's a certain philosophy around the board table with the existing board members that's one of the criteria. So we're excited about what the OSC is doing, and Kathleen, thank you both for supporting that. But there seems to be a disconnect in how to get there and appoint diversity on the board, on some boards. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that the point, the nugget of your friend's comment is real. I mean, the gatekeeper for a board appointment is competency. The gatekeeper for taking a leadership role on a board is competency. And if you think of it from a shareholder perspective, you should never want that to change. Competency should be the first gate. But how people gain that experience can come, I think, in different forms. You know, when you're out looking for qualified female directors, we all know that you just have to read the Fortune 500 or the TSX 100 or whatever it is. The number of female CEOs is relatively low. And so is that the showstopper? No, because the number of female CFOs is fairly high. The number of women running large divisions of big companies, fairly high. And so the notion of business experience is the easy one. In terms of board experience, there is also something to having some thought of how a board works, because a board works very differently than a company. And you learn that when you join a board, that it's nothing at all like running your own executive committee. It's a completely different service for which a different skill set and a different approach is required. And you can get that a lot of ways. I mean, you mentioned that your friend had long-time service in philanthropy. I have a number of friends who recently have gone the board route of joining private companies in preparation for roles in public companies, which is also a great thing to do. And given the number of private companies that exist in Canada, that is something that you can search out and do. And search firms, I think, are very cognizant of this as they look for new candidates. And so if I take us all back to the comment I made about you're in charge of this, this is your life. And if you want to have a role that is like this, then it's your job to go out and find the experiential opportunities, the same way it would be if you worked for a company. If you wanted to someday be the VP in charge of human resources, then obviously you'd have to train and do courses and take roles and broaden your responsibilities. Corporate leadership, corporate director leadership is no different. And so figuring out the path to that is each of our jobs. And it isn't always the same path. A very, very big private board will be just as complicated as a medium-sized public board because they adhere to all the same standards of governance. They worry about the same internal control issues from a financial perspective. They're probably got demanding shareholders for whom financial reporting is a big issue. They will have the same human resource complexities and probably either consumer or B2B issues that you would find in many public companies. So I think there's roots to that, but sitting down and trying to map those out for yourself in areas that you're genuinely passionate about is an exercise that everybody ought to do.
And if you feel you have the skills, you can't later on in your career recreate your skill set, but whether we agree with this or not, visibility matters, and having people who are prepared to champion you matters in the conversations that will ultimately get you onto boards. We built a list of board-ready women globally, around 200, and about 60 of those in Canada. What we're seeing is it is people like you, it is people like Annette Verschuren, it is people like Sarah Race out in Calgary, who's on the Shoppers Board and was an executive at TransCanada for many years, who are really single-handedly as individuals driving names forward, which is having an impact. We need more than that. But for now, if you felt that you had the skill set, you need to find your champions. And if no one's prepared to champion you, then you got a problem. And it's not just you thinking you're ready, it's someone saying, you are ready, and I'm going to help you get that first board appointment because I know you're ready, and I'm in conversations that will help you get there, and let me do what I can do to support you in meeting that objective.
Hi, thanks so much for a great conversation. My name is Alex Conliff, and I'm with Engineers Without Borders Canada. As a young woman sort of plotting, or relatively young woman sort of plotting my ambitious trajectory, sometimes I realize that I'm the one who's creating my own barriers. Sometimes they're artificial, they're the ones I'm putting up. They're the ones that I can control. So I should probably start there, and I was wondering if maybe you could share some of your own personal experiences in your own trajectory where you may have discovered that you were potentially setting up some barriers for yourself, and if you've sort of thought of strategies that you might like to share for bringing those down.
Sure. And I think it's a very good point. I mean, if you hearken back to the comment I made earlier about the priorities that we have in our lives, each of us has a personal to-do list, if I can call it that, at any given moment in time, where the most important thing I have to do is this, and the least important thing I have to do is that. And often it changes every day. But if you're thinking about charting a career course, then getting a good handle on where those priorities are going to generally fit in your life is really, really important. For a lot of women, that first big hurdle comes when they say, well, I do want to partner and settle down. Another one might come when they say, oh, I do want to have a family. Another one might come later when we say, I do have to take care of somebody in my family, an aging parent, whatever it is, a friend. So we have all of these things that emotionally or intellectually intrude, and ultimately managing our way over those hurdles is hugely difficult, because it is a lot easier sometimes to say, oh, this is more important than that. But I would encourage everyone to think about the long ball, and you are very young. So, when you're thinking about this plan, think about where you want to be when you're my age. Because
42.
to your
maybe 38, I'm not sure.
To your point, there's nothing I can do about recreating the choices that I made over those 40 years of education and career. And I'm glad that I ultimately made the ones I did. Sometimes they were made for me. You know, the decision to have children, I've told Alice this before, was made for me. You know, I woke up one day and the stick had the sign in it, and that wasn't part of the plan. And I wasn't ready for that. I was just a few years out of graduate school. I had a mountain of student debt. I had this big job that I just described with Four Seasons, traveling all over the world, negotiating all of their deals. And so there was no choice to be made. I couldn't not work, and I couldn't, at least I felt at 34, I mean, I could have made a different choice, but I couldn't not be a mother. And so I had this unusual circumstance where I had no choice but to figure out how to make those two things fit together. Now, I had to make a lot of other choices in order to make that happen. You know, I had to be happy with the fact that other people would raise my son. My husband would become a primary caregiver, and my mother, my brother, my sister. I was just telling the story last week. I was coming back from visiting my dad, and I remarkably had both kids in the back seat. They're 20 and 23 now. And I said, do you guys remember when Papa used to come and pick you up and take you out and drop you off at someone's house for the weekend? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, my most heartbreaking moment was when I went to pick them up one day after being away in Asia for a couple of weeks. And instead of what I thought would happen, oh, Mom, 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 what they said was, can we go back to Uncle John's again next weekend? Like, what a failure. But ultimately, no, I wasn't, because they were happy. I was getting to do what I was going to do. I had lots of moments like that where I questioned, am I doing the right thing? But my barometer always was, are they thriving? Am I thriving? Is it going to be okay? But making choices like that, and there's macro choices around those sorts of issues and micro choices around, you know, do you still belong to your book club, or are you too busy for that? And you get the readings from someone else. You've got to make this daily choice around your personal desires. I have always called it, how do you integrate work and life? That is taking on new meaning now with technology and what it's done to us. But what I've said to people is conscious daily choices about what matters most to you. And I mean it daily, because you wake up one morning and you've got a sick kid, or you wake up, you know, 6 months later and, you know, your roommate, if that's what's happening, isn't working out. You wake up a little later and, oh my God, there's some parent problem. You wake up another morning and your boss has quit, so all of a sudden your career prospects have changed. Everything changes all the time. That's the nature of life. It's what makes it so interesting. But making sure that you're constantly driving under control your life on that very, you know, always changing route is really hard to do consciously. And sometimes the hurdles build up when you're not looking. And then you go, oh, wow, I can't possibly do that next because I've just done this. So making sure you keep working on those is a pretty incredible thing. And it never changes, because even when you get to the point where you're not a CEO anymore and you've got these other balls to juggle, I'm still having to decide day in, day out on what's my most important thing today.
I'll just add to that, and I think Katie touched on it earlier, be self-aware, be confident, have the confidence to ask for feedback continuously. You'll learn and grow a lot through your career, and your perspective will change.
I should say one thing on that, though, too, back to the confidence, because there was a moment in my career with Four Seasons where, for a whole bunch of succession planning reasons, they chose to promote a man who I considered my equal and not promote me. And I was furious. And you know what, I did a lot of what we all do in those moments. Okay, this isn't going to work for me. I might have to leave, on and on and on. And I thought about it for a long time, and I, you know, made sure I was under control. And I went to see my immediate boss and said, that's just not right. That's just not right. Well, it is right because it's about this and it's about that and it's about the other thing. And I said, yeah, but it's not right for me. And I waited a little longer, and not too much longer, though. And then I went to see the CEO. And I said, that's just not right. If that's the way the company's going to be structured, then that should be my title too. I didn't want his job. I just wanted to be his equal. Anyway, a couple of months later, I got promoted. So I think that the notion of knowing what you need, and then having the confidence and the wherewithal and the clarity and the composure to go get it. I mean, I didn't go in there the first day. I waited until I had my feelings and my desires under control. But there's a very effective way to ask for what you want and get it.
That's great.
Stephanie Tunberry. I work at CBC World Markets. Fortunately, you just answered one of my questions, but what kind of networking, I've been in the industry now for about 5 years, what kind of networking events or things do you think you could do as a young woman trying to make it to the next level? You started to talk about it, but like what kind of concrete networking, talking to your boss, or tips you can give in that to just kind of, like you're saying, you know, push yourself up there?
Sure. I think the most important thing that I did as a young person was, and again, it goes back to the choices you make. I was a very, very busy lawyer. When I started at Four Seasons, I was the number 2 in the 2-person law department. And my boss had aspirations of being a much more important deal guy. He wasn't that interested in doing the business of the department. So I was frantically busy all the time. But one of the things that I always did was left time aside. I used to come in really early in the morning, about 7:30 in the morning, and I lived close, so it wasn't that big a deal because I knew that the president came in at 5. He lived in Mississauga. He had a long drive. He hated traffic. He'd come in, make the coffee. So I'd get there at 7:30. I'd be the first human he'd see. And he would come in to my office with his cup of coffee, put his feet up on my desk, and just chat. And I was way too busy to have him do that every morning for an hour. But it was an MBA in the hotel business. Everything I learned about being a leader in that business, I learned from that man. He was the head of hotel operations. I learned all the things I needed to learn about the culture, about the approach, about his leadership style, and about how the business worked. And so I would say there's no substitute for time and the investment of time in those relationships. And they don't have to be formal or structured, and it doesn't have to be about a file or a matter or a deal. It can sometimes just be about life. And so trying to figure out who those people are that you can learn from and making a commitment to those hours in a very busy week is what was for me a huge step up the learning curve, if you will, in my executive career. So it sounds simple to do, but it's actually harder when you think about it in practice because you want to stick to it and make sure it's a semi-regular but not too formal part of the education. And I think the other element of it is to seek out like-minded people. Peer groups are very, very important in this as well. We used to say at Four Seasons that the greatest test of whether or not you were eligible for next step promotion was whether or not your peers thought you were good enough. And it is that endorsement of your, I knew that. When a person, I knew she was going to get promoted. When that happens, you've got a winning proposition. And so investing peer is very, very important too.
Well, what you're getting at is investing in relationships, and I always think of the two of us. My job is not rocket science, but I love what I do, and I'm good at what I do. Part of why you reached out is you heard from someone I was good at what I did. You care about the things I care about in my professional life. I have 3 young kids, 5 and under. I don't have a ton of time to be out there cocktailing and networking and dinnering. I get to the office. I have 2 pieces of Swiss cheese and almonds at my desk every day for lunch. Get my took-us home at 5:45 to do nanny relief. I do what I need to do at night. My husband, God bless him, who's the general counsel, does do lunches, does do coffees, is out there. I make choices, but being good at what I do and being very, to your point, thoughtful about the relationships that I build and cultivate really matters. With limited time, to your point, making the time in the morning to learn, absorb, but not being hunkered down and focused so much on the immediate, but really the value of that wonderful relationship that was so instrumental in your career matters. You get lots of advice about networking and being out there, but doing it in a natural, meaningful, purposeful, thoughtful way is just as important as being out there and meeting people.
Hi, I'm Pamela Horan. I'm with Business Development Bank. And I understand when you were talking about ambition and how you have to have the ambition to want the next thing. And I think that sometimes what we're faced with is time management problems and taking on too much and realizing that, oh gosh, I've got too much on my plate. What do I do? And you don't want the next thing because you don't want any more. So Can you tell us some of your time management strategies that you've used besides prioritizing? Like, is it just that you get to the office at 7:30 every day and that's just what you have to do, or?
Well, interestingly, I thought about after I said that about the 7:30 part. After my children were born, I never got to the office before 8:30 or 9, because one of my rules was if I'm in Toronto, remember I'm traveling half the time, so if I'm in Toronto, then one of my children got a ride to work, got a ride to school in the morning, one of them. Usually my son, because he was on the way, and she was a lot closer. But that was just how it worked. And my colleagues hated that because they were early risers, 7 o'clock meetings. That was just perfect for them. But it didn't work for me, and I just made a point of that. I'm probably not the right person if you weren't looking for advice on time management. I'm a little bit of a, work all the time. Business is my hobby. It's not my job kind of person. So the delineation between work and work and home and work and philanthropy is a little bit blurred in my world. But having said that, I think that there are, you can place limits on the things you are going to do consciously, as I said before. You can play tricks with yourself about, do you look like you're working? I got an iPhone yesterday, and I'm so excited because up until then I had a flip phone. So now I have I had a flip phone. No, I'm not that bad. I had a flip phone and I had a BlackBerry. And my IT person said, I'm not buying you another flip phone. It's just too embarrassing. So he says, you're getting an iPhone. So now I have an iPhone and a BlackBerry. So somebody said to me yesterday, why did you have a flip phone? Why would anyone have a flip phone and a BlackBerry? Well, the reason was that 15 years ago when BlackBerries first came out, I had a BlackBerry given to me by my company. And I clipped it on the outside of my purse, as we all did when they were first invented. And my daughter went absolutely crazy because she already thought I wasn't a normal mom, the way I dressed, the way I acted, the way I carried on around the world. She said, can't you just be normal for 1 minute while we go to the movies? Can't you just not bring your email? I said, it's my phone. It's your email. Little did she know that she would grow up and be attached to her iPhone, literally nonstop all day long. But in that moment, I realized that there were ways to work and to act that were a little bit about posturing. And so I went back to my office and said, I'm keeping my BlackBerry, but give me back my flip phone. So for the next 20 years, or 15 years, my flip phone was my phone, my BlackBerry was my email, and the difference was noticeable. And that was just something I did. I work at home, but I would only work when the kids were not around. So I'd keep my computer in a different room. If they went to bed, I would work. If they were out with friends, I would work. So that kind of made my presence, they talk about quality time. I'm sure that my kids would describe it differently if they were here today. But at least for me, I felt like I was achieving some form of separation. But there's no substitute for being incredibly well organized. My day timer is my life, and everything goes in there right down to the 15-minute increments, because that's what makes me feel confident that I can keep all the things I'm doing in perspective. But having said all of that, every now and again, you have to step back. And to Alex's point, where's the me time? Where's the invest in my future time? Where's the part of the day that is about the next step in my journey? Where's the part of the week that is about the investment in my successful next step? And finding that time is very hard, but if you're really committed to that, you've got to find it, because it's a prerequisite to getting there. It sounds a little trite, I know, but it's quite difficult, and I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that it's easy.
You talked earlier about really managing your own career. You talked about making conscious choices day to day and as issues and opportunities come up. I wonder at what point in your career or in your life, and also to what extent, you saw yourself in the position that you are now and made that long-term plan, conscious choice of that's where I'm going to get to, or how much of it came by chance?
Well, I would say it was probably a mix of a bunch of things. So if you rewind the tape, grew up in that small town, not a lot of role models. I was just one of those kids that wanted to win the spelling award and the penmanship award and whatever else award was going. I wanted to be the best athlete on the team. Why did I want to do all those things? I don't know. I can't explain where that came from at a young age. There are theories, but ultimately, there was a lot of self-propulsion in those desires. Having said that, very few people went to university in those days, and those of us who did sort of fended for ourselves. One of my very best friends is a gal I went to high school with, and she ended up at Queen's in sciences, and I ended up at U of T in English and history, because she was going to be a nurse, and I was going to be a teacher, because wasn't that all there was? Mm-hmm. We kept in touch over the years, and of course we now know that if we'd received the kind of counseling that our kids get today, I would have been in commerce and finance if I still came to U of T, and she would have been in engineering. So we kind of missed the boat, the two of us, on that front. Now, we cobbled it together when we went to graduate school, and I went and got an MBA, and so did she. And she's now an exec with a big pharmaceutical company. And so we sort of had these problems and then worked to overcome them in the best ways that we possibly could. Even having said that, my decision to go to law school and business school, and again, people have heard this story, I apologize, had nothing to do with wanting to be a lawyer or be a business executive. I loved my time at the University of Toronto, and I was looking for the longest postgraduate degree in existence. A PhD. And in those days, that was it. It was 4 years of classroom study. It was a year of articling and another year of bar admissions. I didn't have my first full-time job till I was going on 30, which is quite unbelievable. And even then, what am I going to do? I ended up at Goodman's. Why? Because I wasn't going to apply to firms. I went to a friend of mine and said, what should I do? My dad thinks I should finish my law degree, and he'd help me a little bit financially. My parents weren't very well off, but hadn't sold the student loans, but he'd give me a bit of money, and his friend was a lawyer. You should finish. You should get called to the bar. So my friend gave me his list. Goodman's was on his list. I didn't know from Goodman's. I went to Goodman's for an interview. I met Eddie Goodman, the famous Eddie Goodman. For people who don't know him, he was one of the great men of his generation, and he reminded me of my dad. And I accepted the offer right that moment. And so that's how I ended up there. But again, lots of stories about my time at Goodman's, and how I ended up at Four Seasons was a friend at Goodman's who went to Four Seasons called me. So is that serendipity? Probably. Why did I go? Did I want to be in hospitality? No. I really liked my boss. David Mongeau was his name. He's now lives in London. And so I left Goodman's to go and work for a guy that I really, really had a lot of fun working for. If I hadn't done that, would I have become the CEO of Four Seasons? I don't know. If I wasn't the CEO of Four Seasons, would I be on the Royal Bank Board? Probably not. So there's a whole bunch of things that are serendipitous in my story. So, and it's worth knowing that when you think about the things that weren't. The things that weren't serendipitous were the parts of the story where I saw the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing in my career. I knew that I was going to have to do some heavy lifting as a woman in a very male-dominated industry. When I joined the executive committee at Four Seasons in 1994, I was the first woman on a 8 or 9 team executive committee, all men. It had been all men forever since the company was founded. So I knew that I was going to have to do something about those relationships if I was going to fit in. It wasn't just they had to take me. They didn't. I had to earn my stripes. I had to become their peer. I had to make friends with them. I had to spend the time. But I also had to be smart about how I went about that. And one of the first things I did was I met all their wives. Because I wanted to know who they spent their life with. And what I came back with was just a feeling of huge confidence, because all these men were married to extraordinary women. Extraordinary. Not all working outside the home. Many of them were homemakers, but they were real partners in those relationships, real influencers. in their husbands' lives. And I said to myself, if these guys can spend their lives with those women, they can put up with me for a few hours a week, right? How hard can it be? And I also could gauge the limits of, back to my forcefulness and how I could interact with each of them. So studying them as humans was a big part of what I did. Asking for things that I wanted, raises, titles, promotions, whatever it was. But always also, back to the question about time management, never saying no to a chance to grow and expand. Right. Never saying, oh, I'm too busy, can you give it to Brett? Oh, I'd rather not this month. Finding a way always to say yes to the important assignments, and behind the scenes, figuring out how to sort out all the rest of it. I've long talked about this notion of work-life balance, and it goes to your point. So much of what goes into that is the absence of balance. There's never any balance. It's all imbalance. And so what we're fighting for is the appearance of balance and the aura of appearing to be in control of everything. I've got it covered. We know we don't. We know we're doing this. It's yoga, and with our eyes closed, it's very hard. But figuring out how to push the boundaries of that as you're moving your career forward and saying yes to those critical moments. Years ago, when our then chair, David O'Brien, asked me if I'd like to chair the Human Resources Committee at RBC, I was really busy, but I knew that was an important job on the board. And so I said yes, and the board agreed, and that became my first important leadership training step at RBC and gave me deep insight into the business in a way that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't taken that job. Did it make me busier as a board member? Yes. Did I have to adjust things in my own personal back office? Absolutely. But did we get it all done? We did. And so I think it's a whole variety of things, but those are just a couple of stories to help along the way.
That's great. I know you're going to thank us. I'll just say thank you very much. That was wonderful, incredibly insightful.
Thank you.
And on behalf of all of us here, I don't know, speaking of serendipity, if it's serendipitous that we were so fortunate to have both of you with us, but it was certainly an incredible event, and we thank you both.
Thank you.
A little something from McGill.
Is it a puppy?
Thank you both. And for all of you, we are sending a survey out to an evaluation. I'd appreciate if you fill it out so that it will inform events we have in future of this nature. And we have a bag of McGill goodies, and the person who is winning it is Stephanie Tombar. Ooh. Stephanie still here? That's a good thing you asked a question, Stephanie.
That was great. That's so
Thank
cute.
You all. And this is not the last such event, so we look forward to seeing you again. Again, Alex and Katie, thank you.
Thank you.